Good morning, everybody. I hope the conference is going well. I see that you have a stimulating and interesting agenda, and I think that personally, I think these conferences are great. Whether I was a lawyer or now as an ombudsman, I just find it great to get together and not only to learn and share ideas and best practices, but sometimes it's really good to know that you're not alone in doing what you do, and that there are people that are struggling with the same issues you are, and I find that very reassuring. So, again, I want to thank the organization for this invitation, a chance to come speak to you about what is still a relatively new jurisdiction for our organization and our oversight of school boards and the way that we hope the relationship works for everybody. Okay. There we go. Let's resume. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about first of all, my authority as ombudsman, but particularly my approach to the role and how we fulfill our mandate, and really how we want to work with you, how we want to work with school boards and the leadership in the education system to make things better for students across the province. And I know that that's a goal that we all share and have in common. And really, I think the theme of this talk is how important it is to work collaboratively and work together. The work that we do is best accomplished as a collaborative effort rather than any tension or adversarial approach. So we try and avoid that as much as possible. And so, as Jerry alluded to, what I want you thinking about during the course of my talk and afterwards is what's in it for me. How can we benefit from a good relationship with the Ombudsman rather than worry about what are we in for. Well, that's what we're here to explain. So let me just start a little bit with background. I know that my colleague, Deputy Ombudsman Barbara Finley, spoke to this group a couple of years ago, but it never hurts to have a refresher. And I know she spoke about the importance of good, strong, collaborative relationships, and I'm going to do the same today. So just a brief introductory to the concept of ombudsman. An ombudsman, the concept originated in Sweden, and the parliamentary ombudsman concept was further adapted in Denmark, and that's the model that we are employing now. And the ombudsman, and I can tell you it's a gender-neutral term. Ombudsman is a Swedish word, and it means citizen's representative, so there's no such thing as an ombudswoman. The term covers all genders. And really what the ombudsman is intended to do, I mean, it started off as somebody who heard complaints from the citizens and took them to the king, and it was meant to be a voice for citizens that didn't have another recourse. And that's evolved into something that is really an effective, free, accessible way for citizens to complain about government or public administration and bring focus to bear on problems that they're having. And so now that's evolved around the world, and in fact in Canada, just about every province but one has a provincial ombudsman. And really what I say to sum it up is that the role of the ombudsman is to enhance governance. We enhance governance by improving accountability, transparency, and fairness, and we do that through receiving complaints and working with stakeholders to get those complaints resolved. We look at maladministration, whether systems are functioning properly, whether there's procedural fairness. When people are impacted by a decision, did they get a chance to comment on that decision? Do they know why the decision was made, and did they get a good explanation of the reasons for that decision? It's important to know that we deal confidentially as well. We have strong legislative provisions, and when people come to us, we don't have to divulge their identity. And we're even exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. So curious people can't submit a request under Freedom of Information and get records about somebody else who complained to us. That is private and confidential. So just a little bit of background on our values, our mission, and our vision, what we stand for and how we approach the work. So these are our values: fair treatment, accountable administration, independence, impartiality, all driving towards achieving real change and positive results. So that's what we stand for. And the mission is that we strive to be an agent of positive change by promoting fairness, accountability, and transparency. So we're working for all stakeholders. It's important to know that we don't take sides in a complaint. When complainants come to us, we are impartial and independent. We don't become an advocate for that complainant. We don't take their complaint at face value. We look into it. Neither do we defend public sector bodies. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I just want to say in our mission statement, we deal with complaints, but we're in the complaint business. It's not because we like dealing with unhappy people. It's because there's a real reward and a real value in solving problems and working collaboratively with stakeholders to get problems solved and hopefully prevent those complaints from recurring in the future. So that's, I'll talk a lot today about win-win-win situations, and that's an aspect of the win-win-win situations where we solve problems and prevent them from recurring. And I can say that we're very proactive in our work. We actually try and resolve problems without being too formal and before issuing reports and that kind of thing. And so we talk to our stakeholders, we talk to the provincial government departments, we talk to school boards, we talk to municipalities, and we tell them on a regular basis what we're hearing, and we share the stats and information with them so that they can deal with the problems, address them before we have to get involved in a very formal way. And that quite often leads to some positive change. And of course, what we're striving for, the vision that we're working towards, is a public sector that serves citizens in a way that's fair, accountable, and transparent. So that's the objective, and the mission, the values, and the vision are what drive our work. These are the aspirations that guide us. So we're intended to be an office of last resort. The first thing we do when complainants come to us, when citizens come to us with an issue, is we say, have you dealt with that public sector body? Have you gone through their complaint mechanism? Is there an appeal that you can file? And if they haven't done that, we send them back and make sure that they go through those processes first. The Ombudsman Act gives us pretty strong powers of investigation. People have to cooperate with us. It's a legal requirement. We have the power to compel people. We have the power to access documents. But I can tell you, we don't use them very often. And I don't think we've ever used them since I've been the Ombudsman. Really what we do is we work collaboratively, and we get great cooperation from the people that we deal with most of the time because we show them what's in it for them. So we receive more than 20,000 complaints every year, and I can tell you that most are resolved within a few days, and actually half are resolved within a week. So that's fine, and that's good. That's part of that proactive work that we do. But if we only looked at complaints in isolation, we'd miss the opportunity to find out what the root cause is, what's driving these complaints, and how do we fix the problem so they don't recur. And so that's why our systemic investigations are so important. We look at trends, we notice patterns in the complaints, and we address those issues that are systemic in nature, that are repeating themselves and affecting a lot of people in a negative way. And so these are some of the investigations and the reports that we've issued over the years, whether it's enhancing support and services to adults with developmental disabilities, whether it's better de-escalation training for police officers to deal with people in crisis, whether it's getting more respect for the human rights of prisoners who are in segregation in Ontario jails, or increased protection for students from unscrupulous or illegal colleges. Those are the kind of positive changes that we were able to effect through our systemic work. And so what the findings that we can make under the Act, or whether a public sector body's conduct is unreasonable, unjust, oppressive, or improperly discriminatory. So that's the kind of things that we look at, and we can make broad recommendations to address that problem. We can even recommend that the law be changed, and we've done that in the past. So the scope of our jurisdiction is quite vast, and as of the last year and a half or so, it's become much more vast. So since 1975, the Ombudsman has had oversight over the general public sector in Ontario, meaning the provincial government departments and agencies and tribunals. But now, and that was about 500 public sector bodies, but now with the addition of school boards, Ontario's 444 municipalities and the school authorities and universities, we now have oversight of about 1,000 public sector bodies in Ontario. And it's oversight of administrative conduct and not policy decisions, and I'll touch more on that in a minute, but when elected officials make a decision, a policy decision, we don't usually challenge that. We look at the processes, how it's implemented, whether it's done fairly, whether reasons are communicated to stakeholders and that type of thing. And when it's a policy decision by an elected body, the ultimate oversight is the people that elect them, and we don't get involved in those policy decisions as a general rule. And we don't have power. I mean, we have a lot of power under the Act, but one power we don't have is to compel a public sector body to implement our recommendations. The way that we can get that done is showing them the value of doing the right thing, and we call that moral suasion. We exercise moral suasion, and really our power is in our voice. I think our approach is what leads to positive results. First of all, we compile irrefutable evidence. We tell compelling stories that illustrate the impact of these problems on people. We have a very fair and balanced approach. So when we're investigating, we walk the talk about procedural fairness. If we're dealing with the public sector body, we give them ample opportunity to provide input and feedback to us during the course of the investigation. We explain to them what we're doing. We listen to them. We incorporate their feedback. And at the end of the day, we make feasible recommendations that are doable. And once you do that and publicize the results broadly, it makes it pretty hard for a public sector body not to adopt our recommendations, and usually they see that it's in their own interest. So I touched about that earlier, that we don't deal so much with the policy decisions. Again, I want to emphasize that we are not advocating for complainants when we address an issue. Either we find that the systems in place are working well and we validate that, or we provide constructive feedback, and I'll give some examples of that in a moment. So since oversight of school boards came into effect in September of 2015, we've received about 1,500 complaints about school boards, and the vast majority do not result in any formal investigation. Normally, we only do an investigation when we are unable to resolve things informally, and that's quite rare. And what I like to say is we're looking for win-win-win situations. Sometimes when we announce a systemic investigation, for example, this public sector body or the department is not thrilled to hear that we're doing an investigation. They're not sure about what the outcome is going to be. But quite often, I can tell you at the end of the process, they're grateful, and they found it to be a benefit to that organization. Either we validated their processes and given a kind of a seal of approval to the work they do, and that's really good for morale, or we give constructive feedback on how to make things better, taking into account their feedback and their input. And I can tell you that quite often these systemic issues that we uncover, they're not unknown to the organization. They're things that they're aware of. And it's not that they usually don't want to fix it. Sometimes they can't find the resources, or sometimes the leadership doesn't have the political will to address it. And so when the Ombudsman writes a report, comes up with feasible recommendations and publicizes that widely, all of a sudden the leadership finds the will, the resources materialize, and the problem gets addressed and solved. And I've had so many leaders come to me after a systemic report, whether it's in my previous job as taxpayers ombudsman or in this one, saying thank you for that, thank you, because now we have the resources to tackle that problem that we couldn't get on our own before. We sit around these tables and resources are limited and everybody's competing for a piece of the pie, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But when the Ombudsman comes in and shines a light on these situations, all of a sudden the will and the resources materialize. So that's what I call a win-win-win situation. And in fact, sometimes organizations start to address these issues once we announce that we're investigating. And that provides some motivation, and that's fine, because we're still affecting positive change. And so credit to the organization for being responsive, credit to the complainant for bringing the matter forward, and credit to us for driving positive change. So that's what I call the win-win-win situation. Again, just a note on procedural fairness. Procedural fairness has basically a couple of aspects to it. It's people have a right to know what the issue is. They have a right to be heard on the issue, and they have a right to written reasons for the decision. So when we evaluate procedural fairness, that's essentially what we're looking at. And so what's in it for you? One thing I like to say is that progressive, forward-looking organizations actually embrace complaints. And that's not necessarily a reflex that comes naturally, but I think when you look at progressive organizations like Tesla or Microsoft, Bill Gates says that complaints, a dissatisfied customer is actually your best source of feedback. That enables you to get to the root of problems and address them in an effective manner. I think you people are all pretty experienced with human nature in the roles that you play, and I think you'll agree with me that if people think an organization is not going to treat them fairly or is not treating them fairly, then they're not going to fully engage with that organization. They're not going to accept its decisions, and they're going to complain, and they're going to appeal, and they're going to litigate. And then the organization has to throw resources at that to deal with it and spend money on lawyers or dealing with appeals or having backlogs of complaints. And so really, to be seen in the opposite light, to be seen to put a priority on fairness and be responsive to complaints, it actually is good for an organization's bottom line and allows it to keep resources focused on the important things and not divert so many resources to dealing with appeals, litigation, and complaints. So really, I encourage organizations to see complaints as an opportunity to build relationships with stakeholders. Now, having said that, I know that there are always some difficult people out there, and we deal with them too, who are never satisfied. And so I think what's important there is to have appropriate processes in place, because when somebody's not satisfied and they come to us, we look at whether there was a good process in place, whether they were treated fairly, and at the end of the day, if that's the issue, if that was what happened, then our work is done. And that's as far as we go. But you have to remember that difficult people can have valid complaints too. So your processes should ensure that the issue is examined thoroughly and objectively, and if the complaint has no merit, you can move on. And they may come to us after that, but when we review the actions of a school board, the measure of whether the school board was fair is not the level of the complainant's satisfaction. It's whether, by an objective standard, enough was done to address the complaint and make a sound administrative decision. If that was done, we will validate what the school board did and tell the complainant that they have no issue to pursue. So again, our objective is to resolve complaints as quickly as possible at the lowest level possible. We have various teams in the office. We're organized in a way that deals with this efficiently. We have the early resolution officers that deal with the bulk of the work, and they're very, very effective in getting to the root of problems, either referring people, getting them the help that they need if it's premature to come to us, or when they take it on to work those relationships, make a few phone calls, and get the issue resolved. More complex issues, we'll escalate it to an investigator, and essentially they will do the same thing, but maybe at a higher level. Sometimes these issues, the people that we deal with originally don't have the authority to make a decision or resolve it. So sometimes matters have to be escalated a little bit. But as I said, if we see a pattern, if we see a potential negative impact on widespread society, then the Ombudsman Special Response Team, our SORT team that deals with systemic issues, gets involved, and we'll start a systemic investigation. And of course, we have a very helpful legal team that oversees that to make sure that we're doing the right thing and we're on the right track at all times. So again, we use alternative conflict resolution strategies to resolve complaints. We triage them. We're an office of last resort, so we tell people that. And really, we're still in the learning and relationship building stage with school boards, I can tell you that. 40 years of experience in the Ontario public sector. We've got good relationships with corrections and the Attorney General and Ministry of Transport, and we're still building a lot of those relationships with the school boards, and we look forward to continuing that in the future. And so one of the things we did once we gained jurisdiction over school boards is develop a team of specialists, really a dedicated team of EROs, investigators, legal counsel, senior management. And school board complaints are flagged to this dedicated team on a daily basis, and then we can determine what needs to be done, whether it needs to be escalated or what the best approach is to resolving this. And we meet weekly. The team meets weekly to discuss cases so that everybody's in the loop, and we can find the most efficient way to resolve these complaints. Now, it's worth noting that we don't always, when we get a complaint, we don't necessarily always have to contact the school board. Sometimes we make a few phone calls, or we can direct the complainant to the right place. For example, if it's clear that the complainant does not fall within our mandate, or if what the complainant wants from the school board is clearly unreasonable, or that based on the information we have, we think they've already received an adequate response from the school board, we won't bother contacting the school board, and we won't go any further. So the number of complaints that we receive is not necessarily indicative of the number of problems that there are. So Obviously, we rely on your cooperation to resolve these cases effectively and efficiently. We assess and determine who we need to contact. We don't often deal with principals. We deal with superintendents and boards unless we are directed to the school. Resolving complaints can be done more satisfactorily and more effectively and more efficiently if it is a collaborative effort rather than an adversarial one. And I'll give you some examples of that in a moment where we've been successful in doing that, and I think most people were satisfied with the results at the end of the day. Just from an inside baseball procedural point of view, how we operate, if we decide to take on a file, we set target dates and deadlines based on the urgency of a case. And it's important for you to let us know if there are any delays in providing us with information that we might need. This can be in your interest because sometimes we tackle problems that an organization knows about, as I said earlier, and can't resolve. So we report back to the complainant that we need more time to get the information, and it's reasonable. And if they hear it from us, sometimes it's more acceptable. So to date, as I said, we've received 1,533 school board cases. About 90% have been resolved as of today. There are about 150 ongoing cases, and only one formal investigation has been launched. So I think that illustrates that how good we are at effectively and efficiently resolving these matters quite quickly. The largest number of cases relate to English language public school boards. Not surprising because they serve the most people. Next are English Catholic boards. The French public has 21 and the Catholic board has 30 complaints each. And we've received a number of complaints where the school board in question was not specified or has not yet been clarified. And there's also one complaint about a school authority, which isn't on the graph above. So what are people complaining about? The most common topic in 2015-16 were about staff and trustee conduct, special education, transportation. No surprises here, right? Enrollment and boundary issues, employment issues, which we don't get involved with typically, and finally, student safety. We know that teachers are regulated by the Ontario College of Teachers, has its own complaint process, and that's not within our mandate. So we work with stakeholders, and when I say stakeholders, we mean parents, staff, trustees, administrators, etc., to resolve these at the lowest level possible. So what helps ensure the complaints don't recur? Well, the short answer is having well thought out policies and procedures. When we look at the types of complaints that we get, in the areas of staff and trustee conduct, or special education, enrollment or accommodations, or school closure and boundary issues, student safety and well-being, student discipline, custody and parental access arrangements, or special programs like French immersion, these are all areas where good, well-written, and current policies are actually the school board's best friend. When it comes to addressing especially the concerns that fall within the scope of these policies, equally important, of course, is that board staff, teachers, principals, and superintendents administer these policies properly. So being up to date on policies and developing new ones in light of new or revised legislation is crucial. So what we suggest is that these policies be reviewed on a regular basis to ensure relevancy and applicability. So it goes without saying that a robust complaint process should always be developed and maintained. So from our end, this helps when we make inquiries based on complaints. As I've explained, our work focuses on maladministration. And if an organization is implementing and applying policies and legislation correctly, and if they are, that's end of story. But if the policies are either non-existent or out of date or poorly implemented, that makes the cases more challenging. So basically, this is a tip on how to avoid dealing with the Ombudsman. But if you have to, it should be a pleasant and collaborative experience. So again, as an office of last resort, we encourage local accountability mechanisms, and we refer complaints there first. But we are uniquely positioned to help you with administrative issues that affect the public because we have decades of experience in hearing public complaints and an expertise in gathering and analyzing evidence on how government bodies work. And I can tell you another value that the Ombudsman adds is even when we refer people back to a public sector body, we're adding value because we manage their expectations, we educate them. And when people come to us, they're quite often frustrated and riled up. And one of the values that we add is before we refer them back to another body is we calm them down and we talk to them and we tell them what they can realistically expect. And I think it's good practice for us to tell them that remember that they're dealing with human beings. This is something that when I speak to frontline staff, I say, tell the complainant that the person they're going to talk to when we refer them is not necessarily the person that wrote that policy or drafted that legislation or is responsible for the problem they're facing. And you get a lot more by dealing with people in a humane and civilized manner. So here's some examples of the work that we've done with school board complaints. And while you may have heard of some of the incidents, you won't necessarily know that we've looked into them because we deal with this in a confidential, private manner, unless you were part of that school board that we dealt with. So in two unrelated incidents, two 4-year-old boys were dropped off at the wrong bus stop. One boy was missing for 40 minutes. Now, during that time, his sister rushed to the school to report that her brother was missing. The secretary contacted the school bus company, and the woman found the boy on the side of the road and returned him to school. Although a policy requiring family member to ask for their child at the bus stop was introduced this year, the bus driver failed to follow the new protocol when the child decided to get off at a stop with his friend. So after the mother called the bus operator to complain, they apologized for the error and provided an explanation for the mistake. The general manager of the Transportation Consortium decided to improve reporting incidents of this nature with better record keeping, note-taking on disciplinary meetings, and the consortium also is looking at improving their bus driver training for next year. So there have been no further incidents in this region that we're aware of, and so that our review, we determined that a good policy was in place, it just wasn't followed, and so the focus needed to be on education and ensuring that policy was implemented going forward. In another case, a parent complained to our office after a school board decided to move their child's bus stop 300 meters to a busier intersection. We reviewed the board's transportation policy and made inquiries about the steps that the board took to assess the safety of the new bus stop. So again, this is an example of what we do and what we don't do. We don't look at the policy decision to move the bus stop. We look at the way it was arrived at and the way it was communicated and implemented. So the complaint was closed once it was confirmed that the board had conducted a site visit at the stop and had responded to all of the parents' concerns. And so we ended up validating the actions of the board in that case. We concluded that things were done properly and we didn't deal with the policy decision. We just looked at how it was implemented. Another example involved the parents of an 11-year-old boy with severe life-threatening allergies to peanuts, tree nuts, and dairy, who had previously suffered anaphylactic shock from touching a doorknob at school. The parents did not understand why the board would agree to make the school a nut-free environment, but not a dairy-free one. So we made inquiries. We discovered that the board had accommodated the child with the allergies to the best of its abilities, and in accordance with the policies and procedures already in place, including ensuring that the student eats at his own desk and that all items have product labels on them so that the school can monitor the ingredients. So the policy was in place, it was implemented in a fair and reasonable way, and our work was done. So the only systemic investigation with respect to school boards to date was launched as a result of the shortage of school bus drivers when school commenced last year in Toronto, September 2016. When the investigation was announced, we had already received 49 complaints about various student transportation issues relating to school buses. Both school boards received formal notice before we made the announcement to do the systemic investigation into the Toronto District and Toronto Catholic school boards. So this matter, as I'm sure you're all aware of, involves some 60 school bus routes that lacked drivers at the beginning of last year, at the beginning of the school year last year. And these drivers are contracted through Transportation Consortium shared by the boards. Among the questions that our investigators are reviewing are whether the boards adequately prepared for and informed parents of the situation, or whether they could have better prepared for the situation. And now, since we've launched our investigation, we received more than 100 complaints about this. So the preliminary report has been drafted. It's with the 2 school boards in question, and we're waiting for their feedback. And as is our process with all investigations, they're going to have ample opportunity to respond to the preliminary report, and their comments obviously will be taken into consideration as we finalize and prepare the final version of the report. So, as Jerry alluded to, I took office April 1st last year, and from day one, I've emphasized the importance of building relationships with our stakeholders. And that means you, the people who are responsible for administering the bodies that we oversee, as well as members of the public at large. And so, relationships at the heart of what we do, because at the end of the day, it's a relationship of trust and credibility that's going to help us do our job and be effective in what we do. If public sector bodies circle the wagons and put walls up when we come knocking, it's going to make it hard to do our job. It's going to make it more unpleasant for everyone. And if we have a relationship of trust and credibility where we can talk frankly and give feedback to each other and accept it, then it's going to work best to the benefit of the people we serve, and that's the people of Ontario. And so from our end, we work hard to show that we're fair and that we're employing procedural fairness in our own processes. And again, at the end of the day, if we can resolve complaints, make things better for the people of Ontario, and for you folks, it saves you time, energy, and money, resources that are scarce enough as it is, then everybody wins in that situation. And again, I can't emphasize enough the value of having people see that you're fair and having confidence in your processes, which leads to an acceptance of your decision, and you have less people complaining, litigating, or giving you bad press. So on that note, I want to say that we welcome any contact you may have. If you have questions, you feel free to contact us. We're very, very engaged in doing outreach. That's why I appreciate opportunities like this to inform people of the work we do, but they're also learning experiences. I mean, communication is a two-way street, and we attend these conferences as much to learn as we do to inform, because if there's a way that we can do things better, and you people are uniquely positioned to tell us that, then we want to know about it, and we want to make the process as effective, as efficient, and as agreeable to everybody as possible. So I invite you to follow us on social media, check out our website. I think we're pretty accessible, we're easy to find, and we post updates of the work that we do on a regular basis. And again, I see that as part of our duty, is to educate and inform. And my motto in my job is no surprises, and that applies to all stakeholders. There's no surprises in what we do or the outcomes that we achieve. So I want to thank you for your attention this morning. Thank you for the invitation, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.